Hi, this is Vijaya Atluru. Today we will see Genesis 23rd chapter. This is about the land. So far, in the couple of chapters previously, we read about the promised son, that God promised Abraham a son when he called him from the Ur of Chaldeans, a son and a land and a name and a nation and a blessing that would come to all the nations through the seed of Abraham. So far, the son was given. Next comes the land. See, in chapter 23, Sarah lived 127 years. These were the years of the life of Sarah. So Sarah died in Kirjath Arba, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan, and Abraham came to mourn Sarah and weep for her. And Abraham stood up from before his dead and spoke to the sons of Heth, saying, I am a foreigner and a visitor among you. Give me property for a burial place among you, that I may bury my dead out of my sight. And the sons of Heth answered Abraham, saying to him, Hear us, O Lord, my Lord, you are a mighty prince among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our burial places. None of us will withhold from you his burial place, that you may bury your dead. So Sarah died. It's almost 37 years after Isaac was born. And Abraham had to bury Sarah. In those Old Testament days, or even in the, for us, the old and ancient days also, people used to bury their dead. In the Old Testament, the principle of burial came because they believed in resurrection or after life, this life. So they wanted to rise from the land, or they sleep or rest in the grave in the land what belonged to them. That's the hope, because that's their tradition, and also a hope even among the Old Testament Judaism. So Abraham wanted to bury Sarah, but he didn't have a place to bury. So far, he did not attain a piece of land, except a well in Gerar. But there is no land. But God gave him the promise of a land. And he has been a sojourner, feeding the sheep and the flock in the pastures, journeying from place to place, grazing outskirts. In those days it was allowed. So he needed a land. And so he approaches the local people who were living at that time in Hebron, Hittites, and he asks that he may buy a little bit of property as a burial place. And they said, you can bury whatever you choose. Abraham doesn't agree. In verse 7, then Abraham stood up and bowed himself to the people of the land and sons of Heth. And he spoke with them, saying, If it is your wish that I bury my dead out of my sight, hear me, and meet with Ephron, the son of Zohar, for me, that he may give me the cave of Machpelah, which he has, which is at the end of the field. Let him give to me at the full price, as property for a burial place among you. So he asks for a place that he may buy. He doesn't want to bury in anybody's place, even they permit him to bury. And he says that I want to pay the full price. He wants to own the land. Abraham's principle has been, even in chapter 14, he didn't accept the booty from king of Sodom, though Abraham brought the victory for them, defeating the kings which captured them and looted them. Abraham said, no, I will not accept even a shoelace from you, so that you will never say that you made me rich. I depend on my God. So Abraham's faith is in God. Abraham's focus is on God. that he would fulfill the promise that he gave to him when he called Abraham from the Ur of Chaldean country. So here also the same thing. So God has molded Abraham, and Abraham responded to God in such a strong faith that he would not waver to take anything free, and he would not give credit to anybody. He wants all the glory to God, who is able to fulfill the promise. That is the sealed affection and the covenant between God and him through faith. So he says, I will pay the full price. So from verse 10 onwards, a little bit up to 15 or 14th verse, a little bit courtesies, because they wanted to sell the land, but they also wanted to say, oh, that's nothing, just take the land, you don't have to pay nothing. But that's the Old Testament way, because I know that from my culture, not now. When I was a child, the culture has changed there too. It is progressive everywhere. But those pleasantries, a kind of an, no, don't worry, just take it, no need for price. But Abraham insisted. So verse 15, my Lord, listen to me. The land is worth 400 shekels of silver. What is between you and me? So bury your dead. So it's not that they were giving it away free, but they knew it's kind of a tradition. So in verse 16, and Abraham listened to Ephron, and Abraham weighed out the silver for Ephron, which he had named in the hearing of the sons of Het, 400 shekels of silver, currency for the merchants. So the field of Ephron, which was in Machpelah, which was before Mamre, that's it, the field and the cave which was in it, and all the trees that were in the field, which were within all the surrounding borders, were deeded. So to Abraham as a possession in the presence of the sons of Heth before all who went in at the gate of his city. And after this, Abraham buried Sarah, his wife, in the cave of the field of Machpelah, before Mamre, that is in Hebron, in the land of Canaan. See, there is a detail here in verse 9 and also in the deeding. The cave and also the land in which the cave is. He just doesn't want to buy just the burial cave. He wanted the land in which the cave is, so that later on nobody would claim and say, the land is ours, just the cave, you buried your dead. So we claim the cave too. Abraham is wise and practical, so he bought the whole parcel of the land along with the cave, so that later on in future nobody would claim it back. And here is the first piece of land Abraham possesses, a burial ground, not a dwelling place even. God promised Abraham, I will give you the land which I am going to take you, which I will show you, go there, I will give the land. What is the need for the land? When God gives the Son, the land is needed to dwell and to multiply and to become a nation. Though in the interim steps they were sent to Egypt and brought back. So God is running the history for Abraham to become a nation through one son, and through that nation one son again will be brought as Savior. One son to one nation, but from one nation who failed tons of times, but through the remnant of the people who hung on to God in faith, out of them he chose one womb, Mary, and here comes one son, Jesus Christ. Wow. God is the most beautiful and wonderful being. He is the source of all the wisdom. He knows how to run the history. He knows how to keep the promises. He sees from the beginning to the end. We are the people sometimes get caught up in one interim step and get stuck there. Let's get some wisdom from the Bible. Let's keep moving with God in the history. It's not with some of us in the Christianity, whether teachers or preachers, are stuck in that nation and the land. No, progress forward. From that nation, the failed nation, through the remnant of the people who are faithful to God, God brings His own Son, whom He chose before the foundations of the world, in Ephesians 1:4. Jesus Christ is the promised Son. Isaac is a representative or a chosen instrument in the interim steps to bring the chosen Son, Jesus Christ. Do you see how marvelous it is? I get excited in God's doing. When I know how I grew up with the get stuck in one phase of the history, that kind of understanding through the preachings. But when we open the eyes, when we see the Bible as a whole, one plan and fulfillment of God, it's even so beautiful, and it is easy, and it provokes us and excites us and pulls us and lures us, that we may put our faith in God, who never fails, who loves the whole world, to redeem those who put trust in Him, irrespective of the nationality, irrespective of the status, irrespective of the color, irrespective of education or property or name or fame. Because He gives us the name. He gives us the status. He gives us the adoption. He gives us the future and a hope beyond our capacities, beyond our imagination on earth. That's God. That is the Lord, whom we worship, to whom we belong, and with whom we want to walk all the way, focusing on Him alone and letting go of the lower things which come and hinder our walk with God. So He buys that land and He buries Sarah. So the land was needed to run the history. The whole Old Testament spanning into the New Testament, it is God's story, how He works with His people, how He promises, how He fulfills, how He punishes when they rebel against God. No partiality. He treats His own chosen people in the Old Testament of Israel, Israel in the Old Testament. He treats them like He treats other Gentile nations. When they sin against God, He punishes them severely too. Because our God is holy, and He is not the respecter of the people, but He fulfills the covenant. And He gives that hope to whosoever believes in Him. Abraham, Isaac, and the nation of Israel are the interim steps of the fulfillment of the salvation plan of God. And they are chosen as instrumentality for the redemptive work of God. Chosen to bring the seed, ultimate seed of God, ultimate Son of God, who is Jesus Christ, who is completely human and completely divine. because otherwise there's no one eligible to redeem fallen humanity, because the whole Adam's race is fallen. Everybody has a debt, everybody has a baggage, everybody has something to pay, and sin, the wages of sin is death. So nobody can redeem the other person. Only the undefiled, God the person, God the Son, who comes into our flesh, who doesn't have a debt, who is not of the fallen nature, who doesn't have the same humanity like us. He puts on humanity and he becomes one among us, and he is eligible to cancel our debt because he doesn't have any debt. He never had any debt. He was crucified and rose again for no sin of his, but our sin. So this Son is for another Son down the ages. So the main thing is, if you see in Psalms 18th chapter, and before we go to 18th chapter, let us go to Exodus 19th chapter in verse 4. God says to the Israelites, after he brought them out of Egypt, out of the land of bondage, out of the tyranny of the Pharaoh, which is pictorially considered as a bondage of sin or bondage of the tyrant, the enemy Satan, in the New Testament. So in verse 4, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. If you see in Exodus, God brought Israelites from the bondage of Pharaoh to the promised land through some hiccups in the desert. But essentially speaking, substantially speaking, God brought them to himself. The land seems primary. No. Primary is coming to God in submission, in faith, in a covenant relational knowing him and obeying him. So God brought Israelites not to Canaan, yes, but let us say to God himself. When we forget what is primary, we hang on to what is secondary, and secondary becomes our primary focus. That has been the sin from the Garden of Eden. Secondary becomes the focus. Let us rise up to put the primary as primary, secondary as secondary. Why so much hung up on the earthly things, on the land, the boundaries, this, that? Because all the land belonged to God. In Leviticus 25th chapter, 23rd chapter, 25th verse, all the land is mine. They were tenants. It's not the ownership. God owns us. God owned Israel. If they didn't want him in the Old Testament period, he threw them into captivity. God doesn't change even in the New Testament. God is the one. So we go to Psalm 18th Psalm, verse 19. He also brought me out into a broad place. He delivered me because he delighted in me. It is the Psalm of David. He is the place. He says, God brought me to a broad place, from suffering to a broad place of relief, freedom, joy, hope. The broad place is God himself. If you go to Psalm 91, verses 9 and 10, because you have made the Lord, who is my refuge, even the Most High, your dwelling place. The dwelling place is not what? but who? We all the time think what? That's why we are so stuck up on the land, the promised land. Let us say who rather than what. Without obedience to God, without acknowledging His Son, what good it is to hang on to the land. The land was for a purpose, to run the history. And in Hebrews chapter 11, see, verse 9 and 10, this is about Abraham. By faith he dwelt in the land of promise as in a foreign country, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. For he waited for the city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. So the primary recipient of the promise of the land was Abraham. He wasn't stuck in the land. He was looking up to the dwelling place, the real dwelling place, that is who? That's God. A city which has foundations. The earth is like a ball. It revolves and it will be smashed one day. And this city's foundation, it has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. God is the architect of that heavenly place. For that he was waiting as he was journeying through the promised land. Unlike us, get stuck in the promised land. In verse 13, in the same chapter of Hebrews 11, these all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, were assured of them, embraced them, and confessed they were the strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For those who say such things declare plainly that they seek a homeland. They were seeking a homeland, a big-time homeland, not a small earthly land. And in verse 15, and truly, if they had called to mind that country from which they had come out, they would have opportunity to return. But now they desire a better, that is, a heavenly country. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God. A heavenly country is the ultimate promised land. So in the Old Testament, if you see, through your seed to Eve, God promised through her seed, woman's seed, will come the victory. The woman's seed takes on different instrumentalities. Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Israel, and later on, the real seed who gives the victory over sin and Satan is Jesus Christ. The same way, the land also progresses from the earthly to the heavenly place. We'll also see in 1 Peter, 1st chapter, 3rd and 4th verses. Blessed be God and the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who according to his abundant mercy has begotten us again to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, to an inheritance. What is it, an inheritance? Incorruptible, undefiled, and that does not fade away, reserved in heaven for you. Wow. This inheritance has a permanence, the heavenly inheritance. So Abraham was looking to God. When he buried the dead in the cave of Machpelah, he buried Sarah, what were the implications? Did he say, oh, I'll take the dead body of Sarah to my country, the Ur of the Chaldean, where all my extended family, kith and kin, everybody there, because everybody wanted to see her and see the body and we'll bury there. Did he say that? No. He said, I'll buy a property in the land of promise, being a sojourner, and I'll bury there. He wasn't looking to go back. That's what in Hebrews it says. They were not looking back. That's why God was so proud to call them to be their God. So God's title is, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He takes so much pride in it. And it takes so much pride in you and in me if we obey and walk with Him. No turning back walk. Do we have the strength not to turn back? No. But He gives the strength when we look to Him. That's what God gave to Abraham. He brought his faith, he developed his faith, he brought him so close that Abraham has a great first-hand view of who God is, and he fell in love even more than his own son. So he walked with him. God developed Abraham. He is able to develop you and me too. When we fall down, or when we kind of sink a little bit or more, whatever extent, looking to God gives us that resurrection, that lift again in our life, to rise up again and walk with a spring in the step, because God is able to give strength to all those who look to Him. He is not partial. He is the source of our strength. He is the source. So Abraham buried Sarah in the new land that was not even his, but he believed that God promised him. So he buried her there, no turning back. So the burial of Sarah here in the 23rd chapter, it seems like a passing, like everybody, oh, I buried my grandfather, I buried my somebody, I went to the burial or a funeral. It's not like that. It has significance. How God is fulfilling the promises and spanning them into New Testament. And here in this chapter, on the side hero Abraham, displaying his faith in God, no turning back, and looking to God, forward to the city. Abraham slipped a couple of times or a few times. Maybe we slip few more than Abraham. But the same God is our God, who is faithful, and He will never hold back anything good from those who look to Him, who depend on Him, who cry out to Him, who lift their hands and say, Lord, lift me up again, forgive me. Why should we sit in our guilt or bury ourselves in the place where we fell? Even if we fall, God is going to rise up. But we have to look to Him. This is not a license to fail or license to fall, but is in the innate human weakness. Everybody has as times of a little bit, dipping down a little. But if we cry out to God, God is our dwelling place. God is our rescue. And we look toward the heavenly country. And the earthly is only a journey we are passing through. There is no permanency on earth. We don't have to fight all the time. We don't have to get stuck. We don't have to devise ways how to take hold of the things that are not even permanent. Mr. Eliot, who was a martyr in the land of Ecuador, as a missionary, he was martyred by Elizabeth Elliot's husband. He had a principle or a little statement that he wrote in his book. He is no fool who loses what he cannot keep, that's earthly, to gain what He will never lose. If we are wise, we will let go of what we cannot keep. So let us hold the earthly possessions loosely, not a tight grip, holding it loose, so that our focus on the heavenly country, who is our dwelling place God, will march forward through times of pain and gain too, never to be distracted by gain or never to be discouraged by pain. God is marvelous and wonderful, worthy to be worshipped.